your first 3 seconds matter more than everything else. You were never rejected, you were trained to feel invisible. A man who feels unwanted doesn't just walk away from desire, he becomes addicted to it. Not because he is weak, but because he is trying to prove something that was never given to him. He is chasing validation. He is chasing attention. He is chasing a feeling of being chosen. And the more he chases, the more empty he becomes. Because desire without purpose becomes a prison. A man who felt unwanted in his early life often grows up with a silent question inside him. Am I enough? He doesn't say it out loud. But every action answers it. Every woman he chases. Every approval he seeks. Every time he overextends himself. He is trying to answer that one question. And the world quickly teaches him the wrong answer. It tells him, if you get more women, you are valuable. If you are desired, you matter. So he begins the chase. Endless. Relentless. Exhausting. First, he confuses attention with worth. There was a young man who never got noticed growing up. Quiet. Ignored. Always in the background. One day, he gets attention from a woman. Suddenly, everything changes. He feels seen. Alive. Important. That one moment becomes addictive. So he starts chasing that feeling again. Not the woman, the feeling. And that's where the trap begins. Because attention is temporary. And when it fades, he feels unwanted again. So he doubles the chase. Second, he mistakes desire for love. There was a man who had many women around him. Messages all the time. Compliments. Flirting. But every night, he still felt alone. Because deep down, he wasn't looking for desire. He was looking for connection. But instead of slowing down, he kept moving faster. More women. More attention. More noise. To avoid the silence that reminded him of the truth. Desire can never replace love. And chasing it endlessly only deepens the void. Third, he fears stillness. A man who constantly chases rarely sits alone. Because stillness forces him to face himself. There was a man who always needed distraction. Phone in hand. Always texting someone. Always chasing the next interaction. One day, everything stopped. No messages. No attention. Just silence. And in that silence, he felt the weight of everything he had been avoiding. His insecurity. His emptiness. His need for validation. So he ran back to the chase. Because stillness felt like pain. But in reality, stillness is where healing begins. Fourth, he builds his identity around being wanted. There was a man known for one thing. Women loved him. That was his identity. That was his power. But one day, he met someone who didn't care. No validation. No attention. No interest. And suddenly, he didn't know who he was anymore. Because his identity wasn't built on himself. It was built on how others saw him. When that disappears, so does he. That's the danger. If your identity depends on being wanted, you will never feel secure. Fifth, he avoids purpose. A man without purpose will always chase pleasure. Because he has nothing bigger to focus on. There was a man with potential. Talent. Vision. But instead of building his life, he spent his time chasing women. Short-term pleasure replaced long-term growth. Years passed. And he realized something painful. He had been busy, but not progressing. Because chasing desire gives the illusion of movement. But it leads nowhere. Purpose gives direction. Without it, you drift. Sixth, he confuses control with power. There was a man who believed he had power because he could attract women. He thought that made him strong. But in reality, he was controlled by his impulses. Every notification controlled him. Every moment of attention controlled him. Every feeling of being wanted controlled him. That's not power. Power is discipline. Power is choosing when to engage, and when to walk away. Power is not needing validation to feel complete. Seventh, he never heals the root. There was a man who kept changing everything external. New style. New confidence. New tactics. But internally, nothing changed. Because he never addressed the root. The feeling of being unwanted. The need for validation. The fear of not being enough. You can't outgrow what you refuse to confront. And until you face the root, the cycle will repeat. This is where everything changes. The moment a man stops chasing, he starts attracting. Not because he becomes passive, but because he becomes grounded. He stops seeking validation and starts building value. He stops needing attention and starts commanding respect. He stops running from himself and starts mastering himself. There was a man who decided to step away from the chase. No distractions. No constant validation. Just focus. Growth. Discipline. At first, it felt uncomfortable. Empty. But over time, something changed. He became calm. Confident. Unshaken. And without chasing, everything he once ran after began coming to him. Because he no longer needed it. The truth is simple. Men who felt unwanted don't chase desire because they are weak. They chase because they are wounded. But wounds don't heal through distraction. They heal through awareness. Through discipline. Through purpose. If you keep chasing desire, you will lose yourself. But if you build yourself, desire will come to you naturally. And this time, you won't need it to feel whole. But the story doesn't end when a man decides to stop chasing. That's where the real battle begins. Because when you remove the distractions, you are left with yourself. 8th, he experiences withdrawal from validation. There was a man who made a decision to step back from constant attention. No more endless texting. No more seeking approval. No more chasing. At first, it felt like freedom. But days later, something strange happened. He felt restless. Empty. Almost anxious. Because he wasn't used to silence. He wasn't used to not being wanted. So his mind started playing tricks on him. Maybe you should go back. Maybe just one message. Maybe you're missing out. That's withdrawal. Not from people, but from validation. And most men fail here. They go back to the chase, not because they want to, but because they can't handle the absence of attention. But the man who pushes through this phase becomes dangerous in a different way. He becomes independent. 9th, he starts rebuilding his self-worth. There was a man who realized something uncomfortable. He didn't actually value himself. He relied on others to tell him who he was. So he began doing something different. He stopped asking and started building. He trained his body. He worked on his goals. He improved his mindset. At first, no one noticed. No applause. No validation. Just effort. But slowly, something changed. He started respecting himself. And that internal respect was more powerful than any external attention he had ever received. Because it couldn't be taken away. 10th, he learns to sit with discomfort. There was a man who always ran from uncomfortable emotions. Loneliness. Rejection. Silence. He filled every gap with noise. But one day, he decided to face it. He sat alone. No phone. No distractions. Just his thoughts. At first, it was unbearable. His mind was loud. Critical. Restless. But he stayed. Day after day. And over time, the noise became quieter. The discomfort became manageable. And eventually, he found peace. Because what you avoid controls you. But what you face loses power over you. 11th, he detaches from outcomes. There was a man who always needed things to go his way. If a woman didn't respond, it affected him. If he didn't feel wanted, it ruined his mood. His emotional state was tied to outcomes. Until one day, he changed his approach. He focused on his actions, not the result. He showed up. He spoke. He acted with confidence. And then, he let go. No attachment. No overthinking. No need for a specific outcome. And suddenly, everything became lighter. Because when you detach from outcomes, you stop giving your power away. 12th, he becomes selective. There was a time when he chased anyone who gave him attention. He didn't choose. He reacted. But now, things are different. He observes. He evaluates. He decides. Not every woman gets access to him. Not every situation deserves his energy. Because he understands something most men don't. Attention is cheap. But access is earned. And when a man becomes selective, his value increases. 13th, he stops proving himself. There was a man who always felt the need to prove something. To show he was worthy. To show he was enough. To show he mattered. But no matter how much he proved, it was never enough. Because the need to prove comes from insecurity. So he stopped. He stopped explaining. He stopped overextending. He stopped trying to convince people. And instead, he focused on being. And that shift changed everything. Because a man who knows his value doesn't need to prove it. 14th, he understands feminine nature without resentment. There was a man who once blamed women. He thought they were the reason for his frustration. The reason for his endless chase. But over time, he gained clarity. He realized it wasn't about them. It was about his response. His need. His attachment. His lack of control. And once he understood that, the anger disappeared. Because understanding replaces frustration. And clarity replaces confusion. 15th, he redirects his energy. There was a man with endless energy. But he used it all in the wrong places. Chasing. Scrolling. Seeking attention. Until one day, he redirected it. Into his work. His purpose. His growth. And the results were undeniable. His life improved. His mindset sharpened. His presence became stronger. Because energy is never the problem. Direction is. 16th, he becomes calm in chaos. There was a time when every little thing affected him. Delayed replies. Mixed signals. Uncertainty. It all disturbed his peace. But now, he is different. He remains calm. Grounded. Unshaken. Because his peace no longer depends on others. It comes from within. And that kind of calm is rare. 17th, he realizes he was never truly unwanted. There was a moment of clarity. A realization. He looked back at his life. And understood something powerful. He wasn't unwanted. He was just looking for validation in the wrong places. He was chasing people who couldn't see his value, while ignoring the process of building it. And once he saw that, everything changed. Because the problem was never his worth. It was his perception. This is the transformation. From a man who chases endlessly, to a man who stands still, and attracts naturally. Not because he tries, but because he no longer needs to. Desire is not the enemy, but uncontrolled desire is. Because it turns you into a seeker, instead of a creator. The man who once chased everything, now chooses carefully. The man who once needed validation, now creates his own. The man who once felt unwanted, now understands his worth doesn't come from others. And that is the shift. Not in the world, but within. But even after this transformation, there is still a deeper layer most men never reach. Because stopping the chase is one thing. Becoming truly free from it is another. 18th, he stops romanticizing the past. There was a man who kept looking back, thinking about the times he was ignored, the moments he felt rejected, the people who didn't choose him. He replayed it over and over, as if understanding it would change it. But it only kept him stuck. One day, he made a decision. He stopped giving power to the past. No more reliving old emotions. No more attaching his identity to old pain. And something shifted. Because when you stop romanticizing your past wounds, you finally give yourself permission to grow beyond them. 19th, he redefines what fulfillment means. There was a man who believed fulfillment came from being desired. More attention meant more happiness. More validation meant more satisfaction. But the more he got, the less he felt. It never lasted. So he redefined fulfillment. It became about progress, discipline, peace of mind, waking up with direction, going to sleep with purpose. And for the first time, he felt something real. Because fulfillment built from within doesn't fade with external changes. 20th, he becomes comfortable being misunderstood. There was a man who always needed to be liked. He adjusted himself to fit expectations, to avoid judgment, to gain approval. But in doing so, he lost himself. So he changed. He started living by his own standards. And not everyone understood. Some questioned him. Some judged him. Some walked away. But he stayed the same. Because he realized something powerful. Being misunderstood is the price of authenticity. And that price is worth paying. 21st, he values solitude over distraction. There was a time when being alone felt like failure. Like something was missing. So he filled his life with noise. People. Conversations. Endless stimulation. But now, he chooses solitude. Not because he has no options, but because he understands its value. In solitude, he thinks clearly. He resets. He builds. He connects with himself. And that connection is more valuable than any external attention. 22nd, he stops seeking shortcuts. There was a man who wanted quick results. Quick attraction. Quick validation. Quick success. So he chased tactics. Tricks. Short-term gains. But nothing lasted. Because shortcuts only create temporary wins. So he shifted his mindset. He focused on long-term growth. Consistency. Discipline. And over time, the results became permanent. Because real value takes time to build. 23rd, he understands emotional control. There was a man who reacted to everything. If he felt ignored, he chased harder. If he felt rejected, he overcompensated. If he felt uncertain, he lost control. His emotions dictated his actions. Until he learned to pause, to observe, to respond instead of react. And that changed everything. Because emotional control is the foundation of real strength. 24th, he stops comparing himself to others. There was a man who constantly looked around. Who has more attention? Who is more desired? Who is doing better? And every comparison made him feel less. So he stepped away from it. He focused on his own path, his own progress, his own growth. And the pressure disappeared. Because comparison creates insecurity. But focus creates confidence. 25th, he builds a life that doesn't revolve around desire. There was a man whose entire life centered around one thing: being wanted. Every decision, every action, every goal was tied to that. But now, his life is different. He builds. He creates. He grows. Desire is no longer the center. It's just a small part. And that shift gives him freedom. 26th, he becomes rare. Most men never reach this level. They stay in the cycle. Chasing. Seeking. Needing. But the man who breaks free stands out. Not because he tries to, but because he is different. He is calm in a world of chaos. Focused in a world of distraction. Disciplined in a world of impulses. And that rarity is what makes him attractive. 27th, he realizes the truth about desire. There was a final realization. Desire itself was never the problem. It was the attachment to it. the dependence on it, the need for it. And once that need disappeared, desire lost its control. Because when you don't need something, you can finally enjoy it without being controlled by it. This is the final stage. Not chasing, not avoiding, but mastering. A man who felt unwanted can either spend his life chasing validation, or he can transform that pain into power. The choice is always there. Stay in the cycle, or break it. And the moment you break it, you don't just change your life. You change who you are. But even mastery has a final test. Because life will always try to pull you back into old patterns. Not loudly, but subtly. 28th, he resists the return of old habits. There was a man who had grown. Disciplined. Focused. In control. But one day, he felt the old urge again. The need for attention. The temptation to chase. It didn't come as weakness. It came as a whisper. Just this once. And that's how it always starts. He paused. He observed it. But he didn't act on it. Because he understood something most don't. Growth isn't about never feeling temptation again. It's about not obeying it. 29th, he protects his peace at all costs. There was a time when he allowed anything into his life. Drama. Confusion. Mixed signals. Because he thought chaos was normal. But now, he is different. He notices it early. And he walks away. No arguments. No explanations. No need to fix what disturbs him. Because peace is no longer negotiable. And anything that threatens it doesn't belong in his life. 30th, he becomes intentional with his time. There was a man who wasted hours chasing nothing. Scrolling. Messaging. Seeking. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into years. And nothing changed. Now, every hour has direction. Every action has purpose. He understands time is limited. And once it's gone, it never returns. So he treats it with respect. Because how you use your time defines your life. 31st, he embraces delayed gratification. There was a man who wanted everything now. Quick results. Immediate pleasure. Instant validation. But it always left him empty. So he learned to wait. To build. To earn. And over time, the rewards became greater. Stronger. More meaningful. Because what comes fast leaves fast. But what is built slowly lasts. 32nd, he builds unshakable discipline. There was a man who relied on motivation. And motivation failed him. Some days he felt driven. Other days, nothing. So he replaced it with discipline. He showed up. Even when he didn't feel like it. He worked. Even when it was hard. He stayed consistent. Even when no one was watching. And that's when everything changed. Because discipline doesn't depend on feelings. It creates results regardless of them. 33rd, he learns the power of silence. There was a man who used to say too much. Explain too much. React too quickly. But now, he understands silence. He doesn't reveal everything. He doesn't respond to everything. He doesn't chase every conversation. And that silence gives him strength. Because not everything deserves a reaction. And not everyone deserves access. 34th, he becomes emotionally independent. There was a man whose mood depended on others. If things went well, he was happy. If not, he was down. He had no control. But now, his emotional state is his responsibility. He doesn't rely on others to feel good. He doesn't collapse when things go wrong. He remains steady. Because emotional independence is true freedom. 35th, he understands that not everything is for him. There was a time when he wanted everything. Every opportunity. Every person. Every experience. But now, he chooses. He knows some things are distractions. Some people are lessons. Some situations are not aligned with his path. And he lets them go. Without hesitation. Because not everything that looks good is good for you. 36. He respects himself deeply. There was a man who tolerated disrespect. Who accepted less than he deserved. Who lowered his standards. Just to feel wanted. But now, he stands firm. He walks away from anything that disrespects him. He doesn't beg. He doesn't chase. He doesn't settle. Because self-respect sets the standard for everything else. 37th. He becomes grounded in reality. There was a man who lived in illusions, fantasy, expectation, overthinking. But now, he sees clearly. He judges based on actions, not words. Consistency, not promises. Reality, not imagination. And that clarity protects him. Because when you see things as they are, you stop falling for what they're not. 38th. He finds strength in restraint. There was a man who acted on every impulse. Every desire became an action. Every feeling became a decision. But now, he holds back. He chooses when to act, when to wait, when to walk away. And that restraint is power. Because the ability to control yourself is the highest form of strength. 39th. He becomes whole on his own. There was a man who believed someone else would complete him, fill the void, fix the emptiness. But no one ever did. Because that's not their role. So he built himself, piece by piece. Discipline, purpose, clarity. And one day, he realized something powerful. He no longer needed anyone to feel complete. And that's when he was finally ready to truly connect. 40th. He lives with intention, not reaction. There was a man who lived reactively. Everything he did was based on what happened to him. Now, he lives intentionally. He chooses his actions. He defines his path. He controls his direction. Because life doesn't happen to him anymore. He shapes it. This is the evolution. From feeling unwanted to becoming unstoppable. Not because the world changed, but because he did. The man who once chased endlessly now moves with purpose. The man who once needed validation now stands in self-worth. The man who once felt empty now lives with clarity. And that is the final truth. You don't escape the cycle by chasing harder. You escape it by rising above it. But even after all this, there is one final level very few men ever reach. Not because it is impossible, but because it requires complete honesty with yourself. 41st. He takes full responsibility. There was a man who used to blame everything. His past, people, rejection, circumstances. It was easier that way. Because blame removes responsibility. But it also removes power. One day, he changed that. He looked at his life and said, "This is on me." Not in a negative way, but in a powerful one. Because when everything becomes your responsibility, everything becomes within your control. And from that moment, his growth accelerated. 42nd. He stopped seeking sympathy. There was a man who wanted people to understand his pain, to validate his struggles, to feel sorry for what he went through. And for a while, it felt good. But it didn't change anything. It didn't make him stronger. It didn't move him forward. So he stopped. He kept his struggles to himself. Not because he was hiding, but because he was building. Because sympathy may comfort you, but it will never transform you. 43rd. He becomes disciplined in his thoughts. There was a man who controlled his actions, but not his mind. Negative thoughts still controlled him. Doubt, overthinking, insecurity. So he went deeper. He started observing his thoughts, challenging them, redirecting them. He stopped feeding negativity and started building clarity. Because your life follows your thoughts. And if you don't control them, they will control you. 44th. He values consistency over intensity. There was a man who would go all in, then disappear. Moments of high effort, followed by long periods of nothing. And it kept him stuck. So he changed his approach. Small steps. Every day. No excuses. No extremes. Just consistency. And over time, he outgrew the version of himself that once struggled. Because consistency beats intensity. Every single time. 45th. He removes the need to impress. There was a man who wanted to be seen as impressive. To stand out. To be admired. So he performed. He tried too hard. And people could feel it. But when he stopped trying to impress, something changed. He became natural. Authentic. Effortless. And that was more impressive than anything he tried to force. Because real presence doesn't need performance. 46th. He understands that silence builds power. There was a man who used to announce everything. His plans. His goals. His moves. But now, he moves differently. Quietly. He builds in silence. He improves without noise. He lets results speak. Because when you talk less, you focus more. And when you focus more, you achieve more. 47th. He detaches from external validation completely. There was a final layer he had to break. Even after all his growth, there was still a small part of him that cared about being seen, being acknowledged, being validated. And he noticed it. So he let it go. Completely. He no longer needed recognition. He no longer needed approval. He no longer needed to be wanted. And that was the moment he became truly free. 48th. He builds a life that speaks for itself. There was a man who used to explain who he was. Now, he doesn't need to. His life shows it. His discipline shows it. His focus shows it. His standards show it. Because when your life is aligned, you don't need to convince anyone of anything. It's already clear. 49th. He becomes unshakable. There was a time when anything could affect him. Now, nothing easily does. Not rejection. Not silence. Not opinions. Not outcomes. He remains steady. Because his foundation is internal. And anything built internally cannot be easily broken externally. 50th. He understands the ultimate truth. There was one final realization. Being unwanted was never the end of his story. It was the beginning of his transformation. The pain, the rejection, the emptiness. It all shaped him. It forced him to grow, to evolve, to rise. And without it, he wouldn't have become who he is now. This is the full circle. From pain to power. From chasing to mastering. From needing to becoming. And the man who once felt unwanted now understands something most never will. You don't find your value in the world. You build it within yourself. Everything you were chasing was just a reflection of what you hadn't built yet. And once you build it, you stop chasing completely. That is the shift. That is the transformation. That is the truth. And even here, there is still refinement. Because growth doesn't end at realization. It evolves through how you live every day after it. 51st. He becomes precise with his energy. There was a man who used to give energy to everything. Every message. Every distraction. Every opportunity. But now, he is precise. He asks himself one question. Does this move me forward, or pull me back? And if the answer is clear, so is his decision. Because energy, once spent, never returns. And a man who values it becomes dangerous in his focus. 52nd. He no longer fears losing people. There was a time when he held on tightly, afraid that if he let go, he would be alone again. So he tolerated things he shouldn't. Now, he understands. The wrong people leaving is not a loss. It's alignment. And he lets go without resistance. Because he would rather be alone in peace than surrounded in chaos. 53rd. He moves without seeking approval. There was a man who always looked around before making a move. What will they think? Will they accept this? Will I be judged? And that hesitation kept him small. But now, he moves anyway. Not recklessly, but confidently. Because he no longer needs permission to live his life. And that freedom changes everything. 54th. He trusts his own judgment. There was a man who doubted himself constantly, second-guessing every decision, looking to others for answers. But over time, he built trust within himself. Through action, through experience, through learning. And now, even when things are uncertain, he stands by his decisions. Because self-trust is built, not given. 55th. He becomes comfortable walking alone. There was a man who feared isolation, who needed company to feel secure. But now, he walks alone when necessary. Not because he has no one, but because he doesn't depend on anyone. And in that independence, he finds strength. Because a man who can stand alone can stand anywhere. 56th. He sees through illusions instantly. There was a time when he got caught up easily. Words, promises, appearances. But now, he sees patterns. He reads actions. He notices inconsistencies. And he doesn't ignore them. Because awareness protects him. And clarity keeps him grounded. 57th. He builds standards, not fantasies. There was a man who lived in expectations, imagining how things should be, how people should act, how life should go. But reality never matched. So he replaced fantasy with standards. Clear, non-negotiable, real. And those standards became the filter for everything in his life. 58th. He stops explaining his silence. There was a time when he felt the need to explain everything. Why he didn't respond. Why he stepped back. Why he moved differently. But now, he doesn't. Because he understands. Those who understand don't need explanations. And those who don't won't accept them anyway. So he moves in silence. Without guilt. Without pressure. 59th. He respects his own boundaries. There was a man who set boundaries, but didn't enforce them. He would bend them, break them, ignore them, just to keep others comfortable. But now, his boundaries are firm, and he stands by them, no matter what. Because boundaries mean nothing if you don't respect them yourself. 60th. He becomes the standard. There was a final shift. He stopped chasing standards set by others. Stopped comparing. Stopped adjusting. And instead, he became the standard. Through discipline. Through consistency. Through self-respect. And now, he doesn't look for value. He represents it. This is where most never arrive. Because this level requires letting go of everything that once defined you. The need. The chase. The validation. The fear. And in letting go, you don't lose yourself. You finally become yourself. The man who once felt unwanted now cannot be ignored. Not because he demands attention, but because his presence speaks. He is calm, focused, unshaken, clear. And that presence is built, not given. You don't get here by accident. You get here through discipline, through awareness, through choosing growth over comfort. Again and again. And when you reach this point, you realize something simple, but powerful. You were never chasing others. You were chasing a version of yourself. And now, you've become it. And after becoming the standard, there is only one thing left. Maintenance. Because what you build must be protected. 61st. He guards his mind daily. There was a man who thought growth was permanent. That once he changed, he would stay that way forever. But he noticed something. Old thoughts tried to return. Doubt. Distraction. Impulse. So he became intentional. What he watches. What he listens to. What he allows into his mind. Because he understands. Your mind is a battlefield. And if you don't guard it, something else will control it. 62nd. He respects the power of routine. There was a man who relied on discipline alone. But discipline without structure becomes unstable. So he built routines. Simple. Effective. Repeatable. And those routines carried him even on the days he didn't feel strong. Because structure removes chaos. And consistency builds momentum. 63rd. He avoids silent self-sabotage. There was a man who had grown, but still found ways to hold himself back. Small habits. Excuses. Procrastination. Nothing obvious, but enough to slow him down. So he became aware. He caught it early. And he corrected it immediately. Because self-sabotage doesn't always look like failure. Sometimes it looks like delay. 64th. He keeps his circle intentional. There was a time when he allowed anyone around him. Now, he is selective. Not many, but the right ones. People who bring clarity. Not confusion. Growth. Not distraction. Because your environment shapes you. And a strong man protects his environment. 65th. He continues to evolve. There was a man who reached a level of success and became comfortable. But comfort slowed him down. So he chose growth again. New challenges. New goals. New levels. Because stagnation is the enemy of progress. And evolution is a continuous decision. 66th. He embraces accountability. There was a man who held himself to high standards. But now, he goes further. He tracks his actions. Measures his progress. Adjusts when necessary. No excuses. No denial. Just truth. Because accountability keeps you aligned. And alignment keeps you progressing. 67th. He protects his time aggressively. There was a man who improved his life. But people still tried to access him freely. Requests. Distractions. Unnecessary conversations. But now, he filters everything. If it doesn't align, it doesn't get his time. Because time is life. And wasting it is losing it. 68th. He understands that less is more. There was a time when he did too much. Spoke too much. Chased too much. Now, he simplifies. Focused actions. Clear goals. Minimal distractions. And that simplicity creates power. Because complexity weakens focus. But simplicity strengthens it. 69th. He stays grounded despite progress. There was a man who improved and became arrogant, thinking he had reached the peak. But life humbled him. So he adjusted. He stayed grounded. Aware. Open to learning. Because no matter how far you go, there is always more to understand. 70th. He lives with quiet confidence. There was a final shift in his presence. No need to prove. No need to announce. No need to seek. Just calm certainty. In who he is. In what he does. In where he's going. And that confidence doesn't come from words. It comes from alignment. This is the final layer. Not loud. Not visible to everyone. But powerful. From feeling unwanted, to chasing endlessly, to mastering himself, to maintaining that mastery. The journey was never about others. It was always about him. And now, he moves differently, thinks differently, lives differently, no longer controlled by desire, but guided by purpose. No longer seeking validation, but living in self-worth. No longer reacting to life, but creating it. And that is the complete transformation. And even at this level, there is still awareness required. Because life doesn't test you once. It tests you repeatedly. 71st, he stays alert to subtle distractions. There was a man who believed big mistakes were the danger. But he learned something deeper. It wasn't the big distractions. It was the small ones. A little delay here. A little indulgence there. A small compromise. And over time, those small things added up. So he stayed alert. Not paranoid, but aware. Because discipline is not broken in one moment. It erodes in many small ones. 72nd, he remains a student. There was a man who reached a high level and thought he knew enough. But growth slowed. Because learning stopped. So he returned to being a student. Reading. Observing. Listening. Improving. Because the moment you think you know everything is the moment you stop growing. 73rd, he respects the process more than the result. There was a man who once focused only on outcomes. Success. Recognition. Achievement. But it made him impatient. So he shifted his focus. He learned to value the process. The daily work. The repetition. The discipline. And ironically, that's what brought him better results. Because when you respect the process, results become inevitable. 74th, he controls his environment. There was a man who tried to stay disciplined while surrounded by distractions, and it made everything harder. So he changed his environment. Less noise, more focus, less temptation, more structure, because environment influences behavior. And a smart man designs his environment instead of fighting against it. 75th, he chooses long-term peace over short-term excitement. There was a man who once chased intensity, thrill, emotion, excitement. But it came with instability. So he chose differently. Peace, stability, clarity. And at first, it felt quiet. But over time, it felt powerful. Because peace is not boring. It's controlled. 76th, he understands when to act and when to wait. There was a man who either rushed or hesitated. No balance. But now, he reads situations clearly. He knows when to move and when to stay still. And that timing makes all the difference. Because power is not just action. It's precision. 77th, he protects his standards without apology. There was a man who had standards, but lowered them to avoid conflict. Now, he stands firm. Without anger. Without explanation. Without guilt. Because standards are not for others. They are for you. And if you compromise them, you compromise yourself. 78th, he refuses to return to who he was. There was a moment where he looked back at his old habits, his old mindset, his old patterns, and he realized he could never go back. Not because he couldn't, but because he wouldn't. Because growth creates a new identity. And once you see clearly, you can't pretend anymore. 79th, he values clarity over comfort. There was a man who once avoided truth because it was uncomfortable. But comfort kept him stuck. So he chose clarity. Even when it was difficult. Even when it challenged him. Even when it forced change. Because truth moves you forward. Comfort keeps you still. 80th, he lives in alignment daily. There was a final realization. It's not about big moments. It's about daily alignment. What you think. What you do. What you allow. All matching the man you've become. Because misalignment creates chaos. But alignment creates peace. This is where it all settles. Not in intensity, but in consistency. The man who once chased endlessly now lives intentionally. The man who once felt unwanted now defines his own worth. The man who once looked outside for answers now finds them within. And that is the quiet power most will never understand. No noise. No chasing. No proving. Just presence. Clarity. Discipline. And a life built on purpose. And beyond consistency, there is refinement at the deepest level. Because true mastery is not loud. It is precise. 81st, he becomes aware of his intentions. There was a man who did the right things, but for the wrong reasons, seeking hidden validation, quiet approval, subtle recognition, and he caught it. So he corrected it. He aligned his actions with pure intention, not to impress, not to be seen, but because it is who he is, and that level of honesty elevated him. 82nd, he removes ego from his growth. There was a man who improved, but started identifying with his progress, feeling superior, feeling ahead. But ego slowed him down. So he let it go. He stayed grounded, focused, quiet. Because growth with ego eventually collapses. But growth with humility continues. 83rd, he accepts that discipline is a lifetime commitment. There was a man who thought one day he would arrive, that everything would become easy. But he realized there is no final destination, only maintenance, only consistency, only daily effort. And instead of resisting it, he accepted it. Because discipline is not a phase, it is a lifestyle. 84th, he learns to rest without losing focus. There was a man who believed rest was weakness. So he pushed constantly, until he burned out. Then he understood. Rest is part of growth. But not careless rest. Intentional. Controlled. So he recovered. Without losing direction. Because balance sustains progress. 85th, he protects his identity. There was a man who built himself. But the world tried to pull him back. Old friends. Old habits. Old environments. Trying to remind him of who he used to be. But he stayed firm. Because identity is fragile. If not protected. And once you evolve, you must defend that evolution. 86th, he becomes comfortable with silence from others. There was a time when silence meant rejection. Now, it means nothing. He doesn't chase responses. He doesn't seek attention. He doesn't fill gaps. Because he understands. Silence from others does not define him. 87th, he stops measuring progress externally. There was a man who tracked success by what he could see. Money. Attention. Results. But those things fluctuate. So he shifted inward. His discipline. His focus. His clarity. His consistency. And those became his metrics. Because internal progress is the only stable foundation. 88th, he simplifies his life intentionally. There was a man who once complicated everything. Too many goals. Too many distractions. Too many directions. But now, he simplifies. Few priorities. Clear path. Focused execution. And that simplicity creates speed. Because clarity removes resistance. 89th, he acts without hesitation when it matters. There was a man who used to overthink. Delay. Wait too long. But now, when the moment is clear, he moves. No doubt. No hesitation. Because clarity without action is wasted. 90th, he trusts the path he has built. There was a final understanding. He no longer questions everything. He no longer doubts his direction. Because he has proof. Through action. Through consistency. Through results. And that trust keeps him steady. This is the quiet peak. Not visible to many, but powerful beyond words. From feeling unwanted, to chasing endlessly, to mastering himself, to refining that mastery daily. The journey was never about becoming someone else. It was about removing everything that wasn't him. And what remains is discipline, clarity, strength, peace. No noise, no need, no chase. Just a man, in control of himself. 91st. He no longer needs transformation phases. There was a man who used to think growth had stages, levels, steps, phases. But he realized something deeper. You don't keep becoming a new man every week. You become one man, and stay consistent with him. So he stopped chasing versions of himself and started living as one aligned identity. 92nd. He stops over-identifying with his past pain. There was a man who used to define himself by what hurt him. Rejection, loneliness, feeling unwanted. But he saw the trap. Because what you identify with, you repeat. So he released it. Not by denying it, but by outgrowing it. And slowly, his past stopped leading his future. 93rd. He understands attention is not validation. There was a man who once confused attention with worth. But he learned something simple. Attention can be random, temporary, even misleading. So he stopped chasing it. Because attention is not proof of value. Consistency is. 94th. He becomes internally validated. There was a man who needed signals from outside to feel okay. A reply. A reaction. A response. But now, he checks himself. Not others. He decides his value. Not the crowd. And that shift made him stable. 95th. He stops restarting his life. There was a pattern. Every time he slipped, he thought he failed completely. So he kept starting over. But he broke that mindset. He realized discipline is not reset-based. It is continuous. So instead of restarting, he simply continued. 96th. He lives without emotional dependency. There was a man who let emotions control his decisions. If he felt low, he acted low. If he felt ignored, he reacted. But now, he separates feeling from action. Because feelings change. But direction should not. 97th. He becomes stable in identity. There was a time he changed depending on who was around him. Different version for different people. But now, he is consistent. Same presence. Same values. Same direction. Because identity stability creates respect. From others. And from yourself. 98th. He no longer seeks completion outside himself. There was a final illusion he had to break. That someone would complete him. But he realized, no one completes a man. They can only complement him. So he became complete within himself first. And from there, he chose connection, not dependency. 99th. He understands peace is the real power. There was a man who thought power was dominance, attention, control. But now he knows. Peace is power. Because anyone can react. But not everyone can remain calm. And calmness under pressure is mastery. 100th. He finally arrives at the truth. There was never anything wrong with him. He was not unwanted. He was unaligned. With himself. With his purpose. With his direction. And once he aligned inwardly, everything outward stopped controlling him. And that is the end of the cycle. Not chasing. Not proving. Not searching. Just being. A man who once felt unwanted now understands he was never missing anything. He was just becoming someone who no longer needs to be chosen. Because he has already chosen himself. Final reflection. There was a man who spent years thinking something was missing in him. He chased it in people. He chased it in attention. He chased it in desire. But every chase ended the same way. Temporary satisfaction, followed by emptiness. Until one day, he stopped running. Not because he gave up.